Are the console wars back? Is Xbox truly returning to exclusives? Should Sony worry?
So today, we're announcing that Gears of War E-Day will be an Xbox console exclusive.
And lastly, what the hell is wrong with David Jaffe being all butthurt about God of War franchise?
I think it's terrible. I think it's terrible. I don't think it's gonna...
Strap in, because we're breaking down some crazy schnitzels today. Like the video if you think this is one of the best years in gaming since COVID dropped. And let's get... Here are the biggest gaming leaks and news you've probably missed this week. I'm not gonna lie, that new Gears of War E-Day trailer was absolutely fire. Credit where credit is due. The Coalition looks like it's delivering exactly what fans wanted from a Gears game. The atmosphere was dark, the visuals looked incredible, the tone felt serious again, and the action had that classic weight and brutality that made the franchise famous in the first place. It was easily one of the strongest trailers shown during the showcase, and regardless of where you stand on Xbox's current strategy, I think most gamers can agree that the game looks fantastic. However, what I find interesting is that one of the biggest announcements surrounding the game isn't actually the game itself. It's the fact that Xbox is heavily promoting Gears as a console exclusive. And this is where things get a little confusing, because technically speaking, Gears of War E-Day is not an Xbox exclusive. The game is scheduled to launch on October 6, 2026 for Xbox Series and PC. That means PC players are getting the game on day one as well. That's kind of misleading, isn't it? Now, that's not me trying to play word games. That's simply the reality of the situation. If a game launches simultaneously on Xbox and PC, then by definition, it isn't exclusive to Xbox hardware. It is exclusive in the console space, but not exclusive overall. For a very long time, Xbox leadership has talked about removing barriers, reaching players wherever they are, and expanding beyond traditional console boundaries. We've heard endless discussions about ecosystems, services, subscriptions, cloud gaming, PC gaming, and multi-platform publishing. Then suddenly, we're told that Gears is staying off PlayStation, and everyone starts celebrating the return of exclusives. Maybe they're right. Maybe Gears really is staying off PlayStation. But I think it's perfectly reasonable to ask how long that exclusivity will actually last. And before somebody accuses me of being a hater, let's look at the facts. Halo, Fable, Grounded 2 is coming to PlayStation. Forza Horizon 6 is expected to arrive on PlayStation as well. I don't think one game suddenly erases everything we've watched happen over the last several years. If anything, it makes Microsoft's overall strategy even harder to understand. The reality is that Microsoft appears to be trying to balance two competing goals. The company wants the software revenue that comes from PlayStation players buying Xbox games, but it also wants to maintain reasons for people to buy Xbox hardware and subscribe to Game Pass. That's a difficult balancing act. The more games you put on PlayStation, the harder it becomes to convince consumers to buy an Xbox. At the same time, the fewer games you put on PlayStation, the more money you're potentially leaving on the table. That's the dilemma Microsoft created for itself.
Do you think Xbox is still selling consoles mainly in 2030?
So look, the console market is stable and it's core to who we are, but at the same time, there's a lot of other growing markets. And so we're certainly going to continue to put out great reference experiences, but we're also going to push into new spaces. Microsoft owns Windows. Windows is one of the largest gaming platforms in the world. It has long had more players and more hours than any other platform. And I think it's going to have a lot of dollars associated with that in the future too. Mobile, we own Candy Crush. We have incredible worlds and characters that can meet the next generation where they are. And so, look, I look at console as core, and I look at our responsibility to not only serve that really well and get that healthy, but to also look at bringing the next generation online.
Boy.
As a fan, not get confused in the future, want to know which one is not exclusive, which one is it based on game or not?
Yeah, want people to have a reason to get on board with Xbox.
Mm-hmm.
We want them to have a reason to buy an Xbox, reason to be an Xbox fan.
Mm-hmm.
Same time, we want to reward all our players that have been with us for a long time. We know that exclusives are important.
Mm-hmm.
That's why we got Gears coming in 2026, Clockwork in 2027. We also want to be clear, our big multiplayer games, live service games are going to continue to be multi-platform. If we've promised something to players already,
Mm-hmm.
we're going to we're going to honor that promise, right? And then we're going to really, I think Asha said it, we're going to make the right decision, not the fast decision.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to keep thinking about this going forward. And I think you guys know as well as anybody that our principle is when we announce a date, we want to announce the platforms. So it's going to be case by case, but we're going to be clear that when it's got a date, it's got a platform, and you'll know what the choice is going to be.
16 years later, and somehow it still feels like we're listening to the exact same conversation. The names change, the faces change, the titles change, but the talking points remain almost identical. I've seen a lot of people praising Asha Sharma lately because she communicates with fans, does interviews, posts memos, and appears to be more engaged with the community. And every time I hear that argument, I can't help but roll my eyes a little. Communication is great, but communication without results doesn't mean much. People keep saying, at least Asha and Xbox communicate with players. Sony doesn't. Yeah, Sony is busy making exclusives. Sony isn't spending every week talking about Xbox, Nintendo, PC gaming, cloud gaming, subscriptions, mobile gaming, and the future of the industry. Sony isn't hosting podcasts explaining why things didn't go according to plan. Sony doesn't have their core devs wearing Xbox logo t-shirts in big events and interviews like the Halo community director. Sony isn't publicly discussing whether they won or lost a console war. Sony's strategy has been remarkably consistent for decades. They build hardware, invest in first-party studios, release major exclusives, and let the games do most of the talking. The problem is that many of those visions have come and gone without producing the results that were promised. When I read Asha's latest memo, it felt incredibly familiar. The language about building a stronger Xbox, making hard choices, focusing on the players who care most about the brand, and investing in the future could have been written by almost any Xbox executive from the last decade. When executives start talking about hard choices, cost discipline, and strategic investments, they're usually not talking about good news. They're talking about layoffs, restructuring, canceled projects, budget cuts, and shifting resources around. That's just how corporations communicate. What's particularly interesting is that this comes after Xbox already went through some extremely painful decisions over the last few years. We saw studio closures, we saw major layoffs, we saw the cancellation of projects that fans were genuinely excited about. Perfect Dark was canceled, Project Blackbird was canceled, entire teams were affected, yet somehow we're still hearing about more hard choices needing to be made. The company has repeatedly revealed its plans years before they were fully formed. It has repeatedly discussed future strategies before proving they could actually work. It has repeatedly told fans where the industry is heading, only to reverse course later when reality didn't match expectations. For the past year, we've been told that Xbox was embracing a multi-platform future. We've been told that exclusives mattered less than ever. We've been told that platform boundaries were becoming less important. We've been told that Microsoft's future was about reaching players everywhere. And now, one of Xbox's most iconic franchises may remain exclusive after all. That sounds an awful lot like another adjustment in strategy. It sounds like another pivot. It sounds like another example of Microsoft trying to figure out exactly what Xbox is supposed to be. The reality is that Microsoft wants several things at the same time. It wants Game Pass growth. It wants PlayStation revenue. It wants PC growth. It wants hardware relevance. It wants cloud gaming adoption. It wants mobile expansion. It wants everything. The problem is that not all of those goals naturally work together. Now, speaking of PlayStation, Sony has quietly rolled out a new PS5 firmware update. Before anyone gets too excited, no, there aren't any flashy new features hiding in this one. The update brings the console to version 26.04 to 13.40.00 and weighs in at around 1.2 gigabytes. The official patch notes are exactly what you'd expect. We've improved system software performance and stability. In other words, it's one of those legendary PlayStation updates where the patch notes tell you absolutely nothing. Jokes aside, these updates are usually security patches, back-end improvements, bug fixes, or groundwork for future features. Sony rarely explains what is actually happening behind the scenes. What's interesting, however, is the growing speculation surrounding the upcoming PS5 user interface overhaul. We've already seen images of the redesigned home screen, and Sony has clearly been testing new functionality in the background. My guess is that some of these seemingly boring firmware updates are laying the foundation for that larger rollout. As always, Sony tends to move quietly with these things. One day you're downloading a mysterious stability update, and a few weeks later, an entirely new feature appears on your dashboard.
Our goal: confront the evil, corrupting paradise. This is Dead True International.
Now let's talk about Until Dawn 2, because this project is becoming far more interesting the more we learn about it. According to actor Dacre Montgomery, who is part of the cast, Firesprite has been working on Until Dawn 2 since at least 2022. That means the game has already been in development for roughly 4 years, and that's not even counting whatever pre-production work happened before then. One of the biggest complaints in modern gaming is that projects often feel rushed. 4+ years of development suggests Sony is giving Firesprite the time and resources needed to properly build this sequel. The premise is also pretty intriguing. The story reportedly follows a paranormal YouTube group called Dead True. After signing a television deal, they travel to a tropical island to film their first major production, only to discover that the supernatural events they usually fake for views may actually be real this time. That's a pretty smart setup. It immediately creates a cast of characters who are used to pretending that ghosts exist, only to find themselves confronted with genuine horror. There's a lot of potential there for both tension and character drama. My only concern is whether the market still has the same appetite for Until Dawn that it did back in 2015. The original Until Dawn felt fresh because there really wasn't anything else quite like it at the time. Since then, however, Supermassive Games has released multiple entries in the Dark Pictures anthology and several other narrative horror experiences. The formula that once felt unique is now far more common. That's why Until Dawn 2 has a bigger challenge than simply being a good horror game. It has to justify why this franchise deserves a comeback. The good news is that Supermassive itself never really managed to surpass the original Until Dawn. Despite releasing numerous spiritual successors, most fans still consider the first game to be the studio's best work. That tells me there is still something special about the Until Dawn formula when it's executed properly. And this is where Sony's involvement could make all the difference. Firesprite isn't working with an indie budget. This is a major first-party PlayStation project. Sony clearly sees value in the franchise, and if they're willing to invest the necessary resources, Until Dawn 2 could potentially recapture the magic that made the original such a massive success. God of War Laufy director Ariel Lawrence has responded to the skepticism surrounding the game, particularly from fans who wanted another Kratos-led adventure. And I think she handled it perfectly. Instead of attacking fans or dismissing criticism, she acknowledged why people are concerned in the first place. I'm so thankful that we have people who care. And whether or not they care, they're upset, or they think we should do something that's different, I would rather they care. So we're arms open, ready to show them Faye's journey, and have them fall in love with her like we have. I understand everybody's reservations and hesitations, and I know that it comes from a good place. They have been on that journey with Kratos as long as I have, and it means something to them. We're not leaving anybody behind. We've got plenty more Kratos coming. I think that's the key takeaway here. Santa Monica Studio isn't replacing Kratos. They're expanding the universe. Let's be honest. Faye isn't some random character they invented out of nowhere. She's arguably the most important unseen character in the entire Norse saga.
It's Muller.
She was fearsome. Damn fine woman she was. Apart from her taste in men, of course.
Faye is dead. Best of them all. One's left alive have to pay the price.
Death is a natural part of life, my love.
Her actions set the events of God of War 2018 in motion. She guided Kratos and Atreus on their journey, had deep connections to the giants, and left behind countless mysteries that fans have been discussing for years. A lot of us have wanted to learn more about her story for a long time. The other thing worth mentioning is that Ariel Lawrence isn't some newcomer taking over the franchise. She's been working at Santa Monica Studio for more than 20 years and has worked on multiple God of War games. She understands the franchise, and she understands why fans are protective of it. Personally, I don't understand the panic. If Sony announced another Kratos game right after Ragnarok, people would complain that they're playing it safe. They announce a game focused on one of the most important characters in the Norse saga, and suddenly, some people act like the franchise is doomed. For me, the most reassuring part of her statement wasn't even the defense of Faye. It was the simple confirmation that we've got plenty more Kratos coming. That tells me this isn't the end of Kratos' story. It's simply another story worth telling within the God of War universe. And if Santa Monica delivers the same level of writing and character development that they did with God of War 2018 and Ragnarok, I think a lot of the skepticism is going to disappear very quickly. David Jaffe is not a fan of the new PS5 game.
The God of War thing, though, if it wasn't called God of War, to me this feels like one of those trailers that someone has to remind you about. And then you're like, oh yeah, I remember that. It's kind of cool, you know. It's like it's God of War, so I'm not hyped for it, but of course I'm going to play it and I'm going to stream it and talk about it. But as it relates to just, I think it's terrible. I think it's terrible. I don't think it's going to sell what they need it to sell. assuming it is expensive. I don't know if it's
The veteran game director, who created the original PS2 game, looked visibly distressed during the new title's 20-minute presentation, and he held nothing back in the aftermath, comparing the release unfavorably to Square Enix's Forspoken. "What the f*** is that?" he pondered. "That looks like shit. I'm gonna be honest with you. It reminds me of that game Forspoken a little bit." Jaffe went on to say that he thinks the new title looks uninspired and dull, which I can't agree with when we're literally talking about an afterlife for the gods. But to each their own, he expanded. "It's dead. That game is not going to do well for what they expect it to do. This just feels like Cory Barlog or somebody wanted to write a fantasy story. You've lost the gore and the violence that made the first game. You've lost the character. You already lost him after 2018 because he changed so much he wasn't the same character anymore. And you've lost me with the cube and the little Disney character at the beginning. This just seems like a fantasy." The views echo his comments about the side-scrolling spin-off God of War, Sons of Sparta, which he described as a terrible first-party game earlier in the year. Cutting through Jaffe's somewhat obnoxious commentary, I think he's generally opposed to the overall direction of the franchise he created, which is clearly targeting a broader audience these days. It's true that Laufy is a departure for the series. He speculates that Santa Monica Studio may have been forced by management to create a different type of experience within the God of War universe, but I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. While I think the original God of War trilogy had its time and place, and is getting remakes, remember, I'm not opposed to different stories being told within that universe. I think Jaffe is probably being earnest with his commentary here, but much like his criticism of Sons of Sparta, I think he also knows he can get engagement by being as scathing as possible. His opinion is irrelevant to me. He sounds like that drummer who got kicked out of a rock band and then says, "The new Metallica album sucks," despite it selling 25 million copies. Oh, you think it's not possible for this game to sell 25 million copies? God of War 2018 sold 23 million copies, and that game came out at the tail end of the PS4's life cycle. By the time this new God of War releases, alongside the God of War trilogy remake, the PS5 will likely have already surpassed the total units sold during the PS4 generation. We're at 93 million consoles right now. And yes, God of War fans want this game. Faye has been mentioned so many times throughout the Norse saga, and a lot of fans, including myself, have been craving a standalone Faye game because we wanted to learn more about her story. David Jaffe has sounded bitter ever since God of War 2018 came out, and I simply don't respect his take. I played every single God of War game, and I prefer the newer ones. God of War Ragnarok and Kratos' redemption arc are masterpieces. And I'm sorry, but I've got to add one more thing. When people were calling Ragnarok woke garbage, saying the story was awful, the characters were stupid, and asking, "Why is that girl black?" I genuinely stopped watching gaming content for 5 months. Every goddamn game released over the past 5 years has been accused of being woke, accused of being too sexy, or had some kind of political label slapped onto it. It has reached a point where this kind of discourse feels like a parody from a GTA radio talk show. At some point, you stop talking about games and start talking about culture war nonsense. And frankly, I'm exhausted by it. I want to discuss gameplay, storytelling, world building, performance, graphic, art direction, and whether a game is actually fun to play. Instead, every release gets dragged into the same predictable arguments by the same people, over and over again. At this point, the entire cycle has become so absurd that it feels less like gaming commentary and more like performance art. One of the biggest questions coming out of the success of First Light wasn't whether the game would get a sequel. That was never really in doubt. The real question was who would control the future of the franchise. Well, now we have our answer, and it's a pretty significant development. According to Amazon's Jeff Gaddis, future James Bond games will not be self-published by IO Interactive. Instead, Amazon and MGM will be handling publishing duties moving forward. To understand why this matters, we need a little bit of context. When IO Interactive originally signed the deal to create First Light, the Bond franchise was operating under a completely different structure. At the time, MGM and Eon Productions were still the primary custodians of the brand. Amazon's acquisition of MGM came later, and the company didn't gain full creative control over James Bond until 2025. Because of that timing, First Light was essentially protected under the original agreement, allowing IO Interactive to self-publish the game and retain a level of independence similar to what they enjoyed with the Hitman series. That arrangement is now over. Going forward, Amazon owns owns the IP, Amazon controls the IP, and Amazon Game Studios will be responsible for publishing future entries in the franchise. IO Interactive is still expected to remain the developer, but there is no denying that Amazon now has a much bigger seat at the table than it did during the development of First Light. And that's where this story becomes interesting. On one hand, this could be fantastic news. Amazon has virtually unlimited resources compared to most publishers in the gaming industry. If the company is willing to invest heavily in future Bond projects, the sequels could become even larger in scope, receive bigger marketing campaigns, and benefit from budgets that few studios could ever dream of. However, gamers have been around long enough to know that there is always a trade-off when a major corporation starts talking about synergy. One of the more revealing comments from Gaddis was Amazon's desire to connect its gaming division with its film and television business. He specifically referenced Tomb Raider as an example of how games and television projects can support each other under the same umbrella. From Amazon's perspective, games are not simply games. They are part of a much larger entertainment ecosystem. That sounds great in a boardroom presentation. Sometimes it even works, but it can also create problems. The reason First Light resonated with so many players is because it felt like a game created by developers who genuinely understood what makes James Bond special. It wasn't trying to advertise a movie. It wasn't trying to set up a streaming series. It wasn't obsessed with becoming part of a larger cinematic universe. It was focused on delivering the fantasy of being James Bond. And let's be honest, IO Interactive was probably the perfect studio for that job. After spending decades refining stealth mechanics, disguises, social infiltration systems, and sandbox level design through the Hitman franchise, they had all the tools necessary to create a modern Bond experience. The final product reflected that expertise. The game was confident, stylish, polished, and clearly understood the source material. The concern moving forward isn't whether IO can make another great Bond game. They've already proven that they can. The concern is whether corporate oversight starts influencing creative decisions. Will future games be allowed to tell their own stories? Or will they need to align with whatever movie Amazon is releasing at the time? Will developers be given the freedom to take risks? Or will every major decision require approval from multiple layers of management? Those are the questions fans should be asking. To Amazon's credit, their official response was actually pretty reasonable. The company emphasized that it has a strong relationship with IO Interactive and expressed pride in what the studio accomplished with First Light. They also made it clear that it's still too early to discuss future projects in detail. For now, there is no reason to assume the worst. In fact, all signs suggest that Amazon understands it has a winning formula on its hands. Personally, I think the smartest thing Amazon can do is provide the funding, handle the publishing side of the business, and then stay out of IO Interactive's way. The studio just delivered one of the highest-rated games of the year, sold 1.5 million copies in its first 24 hours, and convinced a lot of people that this is the best James Bond game ever made. Those are not the results of a team that needs someone looking over its shoulder. If anything, those are the results of a team that has earned even more creative freedom. If you enjoyed this video, hey, maybe drop a like. It really helps a lot and tells me you want more. Subscribe for day one gaming leaks and news, and check out these videos you probably missed. Trust me, they're worth it.